Great. Thank you, Greg, and thank you everyone else for joining this session. Hope everyone is well wherever you are, and I'm coming to you from Columbus, Ohio. And I'm excited to be here with you today, even if we have to do it virtually, because I get to share a little bit of my obsession with figuring people out. And in my day job at EY, I get to work with boards, CEOs, and their teams to help them understand their customers and their employees as human beings, figure them out, looking at all aspects of their life, and how they live, their aspirations, how they shop, but going deeper to really look at the things that are most important to them, the things that really drive their motivations and behaviors, and then helping these businesses figure out what they can do to give it to them. And I found in my work most recently, even before COVID, or the COVID crisis, and now even more so since, that a lot of companies are really worried. And actually, it's probably the best companies that have been worried the most and have been prepared for what they're going to deal with next. They get that political, social, economic changes have been morphing human behavior at warp speed, disrupting businesses and really challenging the status quo. So in the past, up until now, keeping up was a constant challenge. And with what we've just been hit with, it's a whole new challenge that these companies are going to be facing. So what I do is use my background in cultural anthropology to help companies and help executives recognize the nuances of human behaviors within societies and to look for those little shifts in attitude that can lead to big growth, big change. As a brand strategist, I'm trained to look for the money, find the opportunities, find the little pockets of underleveraged value that when understood in the right context can lead to this big growth. So I use both these perspectives to help them make sense of it all. To help businesses, governments, institutions step up and embrace the chaos by understanding how and why we are seeing such great change, and then understanding what to expect next. How will human behaviors continue to evolve? How will crises such as this evolve where we'll go next? And one of the reasons I kind of started doing this and looking at Gen Z was because I found in a lot of my work that so many companies were so focused on understanding millennials, they were missing what comes next. And as Mike Tyson said, everyone's got a plan until you get punched in the face. Many of these companies were already getting hit. They didn't recognize necessarily what hit them. Like, I think a lot of them were thinking it was digital or new technologies or whatever it is that was causing the challenges. But people driving the blow were really Gen Z. Today's 12 to 23-year-olds who are radically different than millennials, and in fact, different from any generation ever before. And really, this shouldn't surprise us much. You see, generations are not something that happen every 5 years or every 10 or 15 years or change with every decade. Generation is a group of people that form a kinship through shared life events that change the society they grew up in. So these events are usually a combination of social, economic, political, new technologies. And for those people in their formative years, typically teens to early 20s, these societal changes set the stage for a common set of attitudes and expectations for life. How they behave in the world, or an intuitive understanding of how the world should work. And there's always nuances within generations, but a generation does have a common basis created through these shared experiences that bind them for life. And if you think about Gen Z, these young people have experienced more change in their brief years than most generations see in a lifetime. Even before the current crisis, there were only two. When the oldest of them were two, when Columbine happened. They had just started kindergarten on 9/11. Their world has always been one of challenges and expecting whether it's school violence or terrorism or whatever it is, this is their norm. They've never known a time without it. And even the big crisis, the big Great Recession that we had the last time around, with that, they were still in grammar school. So they were experiencing the greatest recession and highest unemployment that we've seen since the Great Depression and up until now. Same time as all of this, we all experienced launch of a product that changed life as we know it for all of us, the iPhone, bringing with it the ability for Gen Z, these young people, to have access to a world of information, to see what was happening at all times, including 24/7 news and social media. And with that, when we look at what's happening now, I think it's always interesting to try and understand the perspective of the different groups and how they're experiencing the current crisis. And for Gen Z, they took a little bit of heat in the beginning of this for being on the beach, not taking it seriously, not wearing their mask or whatever it was. And when we look back to try and understand why they did that, was it just stupid youth, or was there something more to it? And what I think was the real challenge is that this is a generation that has faced existential crisis throughout their entire lives. And this thing comes along, and I think they are so used to having things come along and hitting them, knocking them off the block. This was just another one. To them, they didn't understand the significance of how often that this does not happen. In fact, I had one gentleman say his son asked him if he also got locked up during COVID's 1 through 18, right? So he's putting it in the perspective of this must happen a lot. Here's another one. They really didn't understand the significance of it necessarily. But when we look at the broader world and what they have access to, through the iPhone, through smart technologies, through the connectivity, this is a generation that has developed the ability to learn at a rate that is inconceivable to past generations. So while they may not fully appreciate the significance or how different this is specifically, they do have the ability to look out into the world and understand more of what's happening than what we've been able to do in the past. So why should you care about any of this? Why should any of this matter to you? Well, even if they are not your customers or your employees yet, they soon will be. And right now, they comprise 32% of the global population. So the way that they behave, their motivations, what's important to them will influence us all more and more. And more importantly than that, or along with all of that, it's always been the youth within our societies that have been the drivers of change and that have propelled us forward. So whether it's music, fashion, social, cultural change, or views on technology, it's always been the youth within our societies that have propelled us forward and taught us all to dream big. In that regard, Gen Z is not actually different than past generations. If you think of baby boomers, they taught us all to question the establishment and to not go along with what we're told. We have millennials who taught us all to question the environment, our sustainability practices. They have us working in open offices, working with greater flexibility, working with purpose. It was millennials who came along and really demanded these things. And the rest of us have grown to appreciate it for sure. When we do research and studies, we find that it's often other generations that appreciate the flexibility and these options even more than millennials. We just didn't know to expect it. It was millennials that demanded it. Well, now it's Gen Z's turn. And where they are different is in their ability to connect instantly and disseminate information globally, influencing us all at a faster and faster rate. So this is a generation of doers, hackers, and problem solvers. They've really lived and thrived in anything is possible world. And they're going to expect the same from businesses in the future, whether it's as consumer, as clients, as employees. So what's it going to take to live up to their high standards, which will soon become the expectations for us all? Well, first is the need to embrace Gen Z's expectation for ease, speed, and simplicity. They're said to have an 8-second attention span, which is down by 1 from millennials generation. But I don't believe it. I've seen them focus. I know they can when it's something important to them or it's something they're interested in. I think of it as more of a 8-second BS. They can tell that quickly whether something's relevant to them, whether it's going to work, whether it's going to give them hassles and cause challenges. So each generation's view toward technology is shaped by their experience with it during their youth. And given this, you would expect Gen Z, who has had technology throughout their life, to be the ones that most embrace technology, say it's the most important thing, makes their life easier. In reality, they're the least. The least likely say technology makes life easier. And if you think about it, this actually kind of makes sense. I mean, look at boomers and Gen X. I'm a Gen Xer, and I think about the options we have now. I can remember trying to call around town on a Saturday night to try and find a reservation. I staying at home, for an evening to pay bills and catch up on these things, or going to AAA and getting triptychs with my family for the family vacation. We remember the hassles of life before. So when we come across hassles now and trying to accomplish things, password decline or computer crashes or whatever it is, we may get annoyed, but we're not going to abandon it. We keep trying and we'll keep trying to make it work. In fact, we're more likely to think that it's our fault that the technology isn't working. But Gen Z isn't quite so kind or forgiving. Gen Z knows what's possible, how things should work, how easy things have the ability to work. So when they come across hassles, challenges, any of these things, they know it's not them, but it's actually what they're trying to do and what they're trying to use. There's a saying in my business that says, don't blame the user, blame the design. And Gen Z gets that. They know this is what should be happening and that anything is possible. And with this, the fact is, Gen Z's expectations for what technology should be able to do is actually outpacing the reality, the insane reality that all the rest of us feel with the pace of change around technologies. And it's companies like these that are constantly looking at how they can deliver on consumers' changing expectations, adding consumer ease factors on a daily basis. And you know what? The specific category really doesn't matter. It's really irrelevant. Across industries, companies around the globe are recognizing the rise of Gen Z as both consumers and employees and adjusting to their expectations for immediacy and intuitiveness. And while millennials have gotten used to a constantly quickening pace of accessing or receiving products and services they desire, Gen Z's never known a world in which immediacy wasn't their norm up until now. And that's what we need to look at, how this now is going to affect their lives and their expectations. But that was from a consumer perspective. But when we look back and we look at our workers, it's a bit of a different story. I mean, there's really a massive gap between what Gen Z expect, their mindset as consumers, and what they're experiencing as employees as they start in the workforce. So just as Gen Z consumers have come to expect the convenience and speed of experience, our employees really need to be enabled to deliver in the same way. So what does this mean to you and to us? Well, expecting our customers, employees, distributors to do today's jobs, let alone tomorrow's, with dated tools or concepts leads to frustration, anger, and disengagement. It really is the fastest way to become dated as a brand or employer. We must evolve with our workforce to provide the exceptional experiences that equal the pace of change. This is what we need to do in order to give them what they need to deliver on the customer's expectations, what we want to provide to our customers. The second is pragmatic. So this is a pragmatic generation. They're really acutely aware that the resources available to them are not infinite and the consequences for abusing them are real. They're always looking for ways to do more with less, whether it's their money, their time, or the natural resources that are available to us all. And for Gen Z, time is one of their most valuable commodities. And what we see happening today in the world is just absolutely astonishing. I mean, youth are defying stereotypes of past generations in order to keep up. They're drinking less than past generations. Study after study shows that they're having less sex than past teens, with teen pregnancy rates at an all-time low. And if you look across at what's happening with this, even abortion rates are at an all-time low. It's not that they're handling pregnancies in a different way. They're just not getting pregnant. We see volunteering going up. And this is from our recent study where we asked Gen Z about volunteering and who does it and how often they do it, but more importantly, why they do it. And quite honestly, I expected the why to come back because they had to. They were required to. Most schools require a certain amount of hours against volunteering. That didn't even blip on the radar. I mean, the have to did not even enter. They were doing it because they wanted to, and it was things that was important to them. And then when we look at getting ahead, over half are taking college or courses that are contributing to college classes, that are helping them get ahead while they're in high school. So they're doing this for both reasons that they want to advance themselves or put themselves in a better position for success, but an awful lot of them are doing it also for financial reasons. So all of these things, what they're doing to get ahead is also increasing anxiety and stress, which is seen at an all-time high for this generation. And when we start talking about this, you do get a lot of people that kind of, poo-poo it and say, well, these poor kids, they just are complainers and they don't understand how tough we had it. May be true. But bottom line, CDC reports that teen suicide rates have gone up by 56% in the past decade. So even if we don't believe it's real, the data is showing that they believe it's real and the consequences are not good. And this is drawing a lot of attention to health and wellness. And even companies like this, Hello Kip, there's tons of them now. And this is one area that I expect to absolutely explode as a result of this crisis, is around mental health. And Gen Z is seeking mental health aids, help, therapy at an even higher rate than what we saw with millennials, which was extraordinary. But the type of solutions that are appealing to them and what's being put out there is also interesting. So I'm going to play, hopefully this video works, from Hello Kip about their value proposition and why they exist and how they're trying to help.
Traditional therapy is outdated. It takes too long to book your first session, too long to see actual progress, and too long to get to the point where you no longer need therapy. At KIP, we give you better, effective, in-person therapy supported by evidence-based strategies and smart technology. Here's how it works. With traditional therapy, you connect with your therapist usually just once a week. For the 6 days you don't see your therapist, you return to old habits and mindsets. Progress is stalled. KIP's smart technology helps hold you accountable to your therapy goals. Using the KIP app, you can put your new skills to practice and keep your therapist up to date on your progress between sessions. When you return to your next session, your therapist can see how you've done that week and dive right in. Progress is steady and ongoing. This isn't technology for technology's sake. We've proven this works. This is what therapy needs to be, a better use of your time and money. This visual snapshot of your progress is an incredibly powerful way to tailor your sessions. Targeted treatment and progress monitoring leads to sustainable results sooner. Once you hit your goals, you and your therapist work on a maintenance plan. There's no need to feel like you'll need to go to therapy for the rest of your life. You're ready to start therapy. Now what? Choosing to go to therapy is the single biggest step you can take towards achieving your goals. KIP makes it easy for you to book your sessions with your therapist through the KIP app. You can even book next day sessions. So you can get therapy that works without sweating minutiae. Try KIP yourself at hellokip.com.
So Hello Kip's entire value proposition is around getting you better, faster, and cheaper. It's not the purpose-driven message or other things that we heard with millennials. It's about get me back to where I need to be fast and efficiently and for the least cost. And saving time is important to them, but as the video demonstrated, saving money is also important to them. And several studies, including our own, have shown that 63% say that they're savers and they're finding ways to make money. I mean, if you think about it compared to past generations, Gen Z has the ability to monetize in ways that others couldn't. They can go online, they can resell clothes, they can become entrepreneurs through Instagram. I mean, a perfect example that I saw in real life is I have a 16-year-old daughter, and for prom, she was going over to a friend's house to get ready. They're all getting ready together. And she was telling me who the different girls were that were going over to get ready. And I commented that I didn't know you were friends with those girls, that they're going over. That's great. You guys are hanging out. She goes, oh, well, no, we're not hanging out. Isabella's doing their makeup because, Isabella's known to be so great for makeup. I'm like, oh, that's so nice. She goes, well, she's charging them $20 a piece. And they're paying it. So the things that we used to do for fun or giving or whatever, they're looking for ways to make money and they're not afraid to ask for money. So this is one change I think that they'll drive for all generations, is this idea about asking for money and charging for things that past generations would never have thought about charging for. This is from a study that we did with Gen Z, EY did with Gen Z. We fielded it toward the end of last year. We just released it at the end of January, and I'll provide the link so you can get into all the details of the study. But when we asked Gen Z in the US what their top concerns are, this is 12 to 22-year-olds at the time, three of the top five came up around money. It was around having enough money, getting a good job, paying for college. And this was before the crisis. I mean, you can only imagine where their mind is going to go now when they were already obsessed and feeling that they weren't prepared and they weren't going to be able to take care of themselves financially. This is likely to drive their attitudes back to the generation that we saw after the Great Depression, and how their views toward money were very different than what we had seen before. So what does this mean to all of us? I think the biggest thing is to think about when we're looking at what we can deliver to consumers or employees. Don't jump to the top of Maslow's hierarchy. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy, but his thought was that in order to get things like esteem and self-actualization, this is when we talk about purpose and the importance of purpose, we first got to fulfill the bottom level needs. And Gen Z is very focused on bottom level needs. Again, before the crisis, we can only imagine what's happening now. They were focused on things like financial, security, safety, knowing they're taken care of, and that they can take care of themselves. This was before, and now we'll see it explode even further. So the last we're going to look at is authenticity. So after an era of fake news and posed filtered photos projecting that perfect image, Gen Z are ready to get real, and it's leading us into a new era of authenticity. And Gen Z is leading with once taboo topics like body image, gender, race, mental health. Things that once seemed alternative, eccentric, or even fringe are now being brought a part of our new standards and showing up in policies, communications, marketing. It's kind of a nuanced, fluid, more complicated view of what humanity is and how they think it should be treated. And it's showing up in different ways in their own personal behaviors, even in social media. This is an example of Snapchat versus Instagram. So Snapchat, a favorite of Gen Z, versus Instagram, still the favorite of millennials. And millennials admit that they take, on average, they said 7 pictures before finding one that's perfect enough, the perfect selfie to post. My guess from what I've seen is that it's actually quite higher than that. But for Gen Z and Snapchat and other media they're on, the idea of being perfect, of trying to get to that point and worrying about how you look perfectly, it's not cool. It's just not, it's seen as just as bad as for millennials taking a picture and posing it in the bad frame. If we think about their behavior, if any of you have Gen Z or younger children in your life, you've seen them talking on FaceTime, all along. This is nothing new. So what we're doing right now, talking on video, 2 months ago, we would have looked at very differently. We would have been concerned about how we look, make sure that we're projecting everything perfect. Now we're moving to the Gen Z realm where they've already been all along. And this is bringing us into a whole new level of authenticity. And Gen Z live out loud, and they're leading with topics that have once been taboo as a way of conveying who they are and challenging the status quo. And they're going to expect the same level of authenticity from businesses in the future. This is one of my favorite that came out through the crisis. And if you follow news anchors, CEOs, you name it, they're getting much more real about what their life is. And Becky Quick, who's one of my favorite anchors, talks about her studio at home and what she's going through in order to broadcast and make it look still so professional. And she talks about the towels, makes a comment about the towels next to the door in this picture. And her point is she has to actually put towels under the door so that her 3-year-old doesn't hear her voice and want to come in and sit on her lap, through the broadcast. And this is a level of authenticity about what our real lives are like, what we really have going on, that none of us expressed in the past. And this is increasingly becoming the norm. The question is, out of this crisis, will this continue to become the norm? And my hope is that it will, because this brings us that level of authenticity, which brings diversity by allowing people to be themselves. This is one of my favorite quotes from Sally Krawcheck about the power of diversity being diversity. her point is around women, letting women be women. But that whole idea about letting people be themselves, letting them be their authentic selves and not pretend or try to fit into the mold is where we get the diversity of ideas that we're going to need to innovate in the future and change how we're doing business. It's going to become more important than ever. And I'm sure you've all seen study after study that show that diversity yields better results. 70% more likely to capture new markets and almost 2 times more likely to be innovative. One size does not fit all. And with Gen Z, this is proving to be a really good thing because Gen Z is the most diverse generation on every demographic measure. But also their attitudes and their behaviors will continuously blur demographic lines as they reject traditional categorizations such as race, ethnicity, sex, gender. For example, 50% of today's youth consider themselves to be multiracial. I mean, this is 3 times the number of what we see in general population. And this can be a great advantage to us. It's not just the demographics, it's the psychographics, it's their motivations, their attitudes, how they see the world. And we knew there were differences from our qualitative research that we've done on Gen Z, but we wanted to test it out, to see if it would, they'd really fall into unique segments and understand how these segments are different and how big they are. So we walked the talk and decided to do our own study. And we conducted a nationally representative quantitative study in the US of 12 to 22-year-olds. This is what we did at the end of last year in order to understand what drives them, what motivates them, and examine the attitudes and behaviors and passions of this cohort and identifying the trends and opportunities for businesses out of it. And we did find that they're different. We found 5 unique segments with different attitudes, behaviors, but really focusing mostly on their motivations. And each segment represents an opportunity. Each one is unique, and understanding them individually rather than looking at them as a whole, making the same mistake that so many have with millennials, talking about them as if they're this homogeneous group, which they're really not. If we understand what drives them uniquely, we can both do better for them, but do better business by understanding it. So I'm going to share a little bit about each of the segments. I want to make sure I leave enough time for questions. So the first segment I'm going to talk about is stress drivers. And stress drivers make up 35% of Gen Z, and this is the largest segment that we found within our segmentation study. And this group is driven by a need to live up to the expectations of our overproductive world. Stress drivers are known as to set big goals for themselves and their willingness to stress themselves out in order to drive, in their drive to achieve them. So winning companies and leaders of institutions will challenge them. The way to win with stress drivers is to challenge them, proactively recognize their value while helping them discover the boundaries that are needed for a healthy life. Because out of this crisis, again, we can expect this group to, their stress to go off the charts. So in order to get the most out of them, we also need to help them understand how do they monitor what they're doing and take wellness, both physical and mental, into consideration. So the next group I'm going to talk about isn't actually the second biggest, but it's definitely the second most influential. Authentic activists make up 16% of Gen Z. And this is a group that is driven, unlike stress drivers, who they're driven to succeed out of fear of failure. Authentic activists are driven to succeed out of fear of, or they're driven to do what they do out of fear of what will happen if they don't. So whether it's around gun control or environmental issues or women's issues, it's the idea if they don't do something, they're afraid that these things are going to go on and they won't get solved. And this group does skew female. So stress drivers is pretty equal between male and female. And this group skews female. One of the reasons we believe for that, well, all their activities are involved in certainly aren't all female activities. This is a group that grew up in the last few years around the Me Too movement. So many of the women, the young women and girls within this group, have seen that be the norm, the idea of standing up and women standing up for themselves and talking about what's wrong. And they've seen that as expectation. So even if they're not standing up for the same rights for themselves, or that's not their focus, the idea of women taking the lead in these things is something that they have seen as being a norm. The next group, which is the second largest, are big plans, low energy. And this group most closely resembles the stereotype, I want to say stereotype, placed on millennials in past decades. So I'm not saying that's what millennials are, but that's where they've been pigeonholed. And one of the reasons I think millennials probably were is they probably had a group of people who represented big plans, low energy within their generation. But they overtook the message or the media about the generation and not recognizing that there's so many different groups within them. Big plans, low energy can be best understood as the person with big goals, thinks they're going to do really well, but isn't necessarily willing to put in the time or energy to make it happen. One of the most interesting things I think about this group is that they're the most active on social media from a self-promotion standpoint. So all the generations use social media to a large degree, but they use it in different ways. So the other segments are using it to a greater percentage as a way of communicating. So a way of communicating with one another, communicating with family, whatever it is, not necessarily about promoting themselves. Where big plans, low energy uses it a way to promote what they're doing, what they're interested in, trying to enhance the overall perception of who they are. And where I think it's important to understand that is if companies are doing social, trying to understand consumers through social assessments and social analysis, within Gen Z, they're going to get a disproportionate number of these people that they're looking at and understanding Gen Z as this group of people. So as we do these different things, it's important to understand that all the people on social media do not represent all of Gen Z. They might disproportionately represent this group, which isn't necessarily the group that is going to bring in the most dollars, whether as a consumer or as an employee. And the fourth group is secluded perfectionist. So they're focused on being the best for the love of what they do, meaning they don't really care about fame, or it's not a focus on money. It's something that they have found that they love to do, whether it's video games, skiing, or math. But they're focused on being the absolute best at it. And this group, I think, could actually be a secret weapon to organizations. I mean, understanding how to pull them in and how to motivate them and give them something they really love and letting them loose could be a huge advantage. Then the last one we're looking at are called carefree constituents. And definition of go with the flow. This group is going to go with the crowd, whether it's for good or bad. So within an organization, they can be a great asset. If you develop a great culture, they're going to go with it. If you have a culture that's challenged, they could be the part that helps bring it down. Same as with consumers. This is going to be the group that makes up the mainstream that can bring mass to a brand, but they're not the ones that's going to decide what's the best thing to purchase or what's cool or what's not. So these are the 5 Gen Z segments, and understanding each of them and what the value they can bring to the organization is really where the biggest value comes in. Oops. And then just a few questions to think about around all these with intuitive, efficient, or pragmatic, and authenticity. With intuitiveness, we think about how we can implement technologies and processes that meet the needs of future consumers and employees, understanding the ease, the simplicity that they expect. With efficient or pragmatic, it's looking at how we can help them maximize their time across all areas of their lives. So whether it's consumer or employee, going beyond what we're trying to sell to a consumer or going beyond what an employee does inside our doors, if we can help them be more efficient and meet their pragmatic needs, we'll have a better chance of gaining loyalty as whether consumers or employees. And then authenticity is looking at how we can understand and cultivate the diversity of the people, allowing them to be more themselves within the organization and the broader ecosystem. So shared a lot of information. I think one of the bottom line around all of this is that visibility, into the future really is diminishing and diminishing every day, it seems. Predicting what will happen next has gotten exponentially more difficult. But is it impossible to imagine the possibilities? I really don't think it is. I mean, each generation presents a new, unique set of opportunities. Unlocking these opportunities requires an understanding of the people that are driving the change. So if you want a glimpse into the future and see where it may be heading, what consumers may want, the easiest, the cheapest way to do that is to look at demographics. Look at Gen Z, where they were before this crisis, how they're evolving out of this crisis, what they're going to be in the future. And this gives us an indication of what the rest of society, where the rest of society is going to go as well. So with that, I am going to ask Matt or Terry to open it up to questions.